Hello folks, Jason Chrisman, JC's Bees. Today I want to talk about my homemade ProVap and give a demonstration on how to do a ProVap treatment. If you paid attention to my video last week on how to do a ProVap treatment with the wand, you're going to notice today's treatment, there's a lot less time involved and therefore it goes a lot quicker. I also want to talk about some of the things I've changed on my homemade ProVap and some of the settings. That part of the video will be clear at the very end. So if that's all you're interested in, you want to hop straight to the end. Although I'd rather see you hang around and watch the whole thing, I understand. Before we get into that though, I want to talk about the goldenrod. You can see it in full bloom here behind me. You're probably smelling goldenrod at your place. Kind of smells like a really pungent, stinky footlocker. Yep, that's about what it smells like. That's goldenrod. You'll also notice a bright orange pollen coming in on the bees. Now this is the last real strong nectar source for the bees before they go into winter. So having this goldenrod flow is very, very important. And if you're in an area that doesn't have much goldenrod, I'm sorry, but you're going to have to do a little bit more feeding than everybody else. But that's the way it is. Personally, I'm kind of hoping that the bees store some of this nectar up in the supers and I'm able to harvest some of it. But if they don't, I understand. They need it probably more than I do. If you're not familiar with goldenrod, this is what it looks like. I'll give you a close look here. This is the plant. And a lot of people get this confused for ragweed. And that's why a lot of it gets cut down in the fall. This is not ragweed. This will do nothing to your allergies. It's simply beneficial to the pollinators. That's it. Right here we have an aster, a purple aster that's about to break open. This stuff is just beautiful when it blooms. But anyway, we got a couple acres here of it. I got more over here, just over the hill. You can see some of it, but it's all over here on the farm. And I'm glad to have it for the bees, and it'll save me a little bit money on sugar, and it all works out for everybody. So let's hop on over to my ProVap demonstration. Okay, so before we get started, let's talk about some of the things you're going to need. You're going to need your ProVap or your homemade ProVap, which I have here. You're going to need your mocaps, which I have one on the end. I don't have the extras out here, but I do have extras. You're going to need a heavy-duty extension cord. This is not your standard extension cord. Look how big in diameter it is. You're also going to want a generator or some kind of inverter that you can put into your vehicle to make AC. You're also going to need respirator rated for gas and fumes, safety glasses, and your oxalic acid. So pretty simple. Okay, so now that you've got all the materials, what you're going to want to find is a way to make this moving from hive to hive a little easier with that generator. Even though they're compact, they are still very heavy. So you don't want to be lugging it around. So get you a wagon and put behind your mower or ATV, maybe a wheelbarrow, strap it to a dolly, something to make it easier to move from one hive to the next. You're also going to want to get your generator started and let it run for a couple minutes before you plug in the extension cord and the ProVap. Okay folks, as mentioned, I will be using the wagon behind the ATV to pull everything I need. And one thing I didn't mention that you're going to need is some rags. You need to plug off the entrance so the bees are not escaping and so that it holds in all the vapors. So what I've got is some old pieces of this t-shirt that I've just cut down into strips, and that's what I'll be using. You're also probably going to want your veil because the bees probably aren't particularly going to be a big fan of what you're about to do to them. But other than that, I think I've already mentioned everything you need. So what we're going to do now is I'm going to get the generator going. I'm going to let it run for about 2-3 minutes. I'm going to plug in my extension cord and we're going to start treating these hives right here. If we look around the face this morning, it's about 7:30 in the morning, so there's not a whole lot of flight. It will be kind of fun to push those bees back in so that I can put the rag there. But it is what it is. Got to do it. Okay, so it's been running for about 3 minutes. I'm going to go ahead and plug it in. At this point, we'll go ahead and turn on our ProVap and let it begin to warm up. One thing you're going to need that I forgot to mention is some kind of a timer. I will be using this oven timer. Okay, so we're at 427 degrees. It's almost go time. You can see the band heater just kicked off and we are now at temperature. Of course, like I mentioned, it is going to climb slightly over, but until I figure out more of the adjustments, it is what it is. I know my bees need treated, and I know this will turn oxalic acid into vapor, so that's what I'm going to do. The next thing we need to do is remove the super, because you do not want to treat with oxalic acid while your super is on. So you can either remove it, set it to the side, or you can simply lift it up, put a piece of cardboard or plexiglass in there until your treatment's over, and then remove it. I don't have that today, so what I'm going to do is just simply remove it. So you can see what I did is I turned my lid upside down because I have an entrance here, and what that will do is help hold in the fumes or the vapors. So now what we can do, I can go ahead and treat. But I just stood the super on end, bees and all. Now that super weighs about 20 pounds right now. Lots of goldenrod nectar in there, I can smell it. So now to begin our treatment. You can see on the back of these hives, I've drilled a hole towards the bottom, and I've inserted a piece of dowel rod in those holes. That's where I'll be treating from. You want to make sure you've got a respirator approved for gases and fumes. You should also wear some kind of eye protection, whether it's safety glasses or safety sunglasses, and that's what I'll be wearing. We want to set 2 minutes on our timer right when we go to start the treatment. Now we'll remove the ProVap and get ready to do the next hive. We'll want to stick the plug in though as soon as we remove the vaporizer. That way it holds the fumes in or the vapors for an additional 10 minutes. As you can see, the next one doesn't have a super and the far one has two. So the middle one, all I had to do is block off the entrance. I got a hole there in the corner I need to plug off, and then I can begin my treatment. Now that the treatment is done, I can go ahead and put the super back on and move on along. Pretty simple, huh? A lot quicker than the wand for dang sure. Because see, as you stick the vaporizer in and treat for your 2 minutes, you remove the ProVap, then plug the hole off, and you leave your rag on the front for 10 minutes and you move on to the next colony. So for this reason, I guess you're going to want a pile of rags or a stash of rags to block off entrances, because at one given time you could have as many as 5 hives in the 10-minute stage, and you're moving on down the line, and all you have to do is come back and remove those rags and leapfrog them along as you need them. So a lot quicker method here. Now I will say this vaporizer is exactly, now I will say this respirator isn't exactly my favorite thing to wear. Looking at this morning here, and it's full of what looks like water, but it's sweat because it's so muggy out. So yeah, it's no fun to wear, but it is for the benefit of your health. These oxalic vapors are very, very strong, and you do not want to inhale them. So make sure you wear this. I know I neglected to point that out. I know I neglected to do that last week in my video, but at the same time, after I inserted the acid into the wand and shoved it into the hive, I completely put myself out of the situation by stepping back. That's not necessarily a no-no, but at the same time, if the wind would shift, I would have inhaled those vapors, and that's nothing I want to do. So right here, folks, you can get one of these for like 20-25 bucks. I'm going to have all of the materials that you need linked down in the video description if you're interested. I'm also going to link my homemade ProVap if that's something you're interested in making. And if you have any questions, ask them down below. I'll tell you, I definitely prefer this over the wand any day of the week. So I got to continue on over to my nuke yard and do a bunch of nukes over there. And then I've got some other hives and another bee yard to go do. So busy day ahead of me, so I better keep on moving. Okay, so I want to talk about some of the things that I've modified since my last video on the homemade ProVap. You know, going into this, I didn't really fully understand the heating of the cook pot. My thought was it should maintain the set temperature, but that's not at all how it works. You see, the way the PID is set up is once it reaches your desired temperature, which you can see down here, the green number, I have it set for 430 degrees. Once it reaches the 430 degrees, the PID shuts off the band heater, which is down around your cook pot, but the temperature still climbs. As you can see, we're at 525. This light you see is an alarm light because it went over 500 degrees. But the output has shut off, and the output, or the out light here, is off, indicating that. Well, I've tried my darndest to get it to where it doesn't climb any higher than it needs. I would like for it not to get any hotter than 450 degrees. But I've struggled with that for the last couple weeks. One of the things I did do is get some wood burner gasket and wrap around the top, and that helps it maintain its heat a little longer, and I do think that is helping. I also had to change out my band heater from my original one because doing all this playing in the PID, I burnt the old one up. This one seems to be working very well, and it just so happens that for the same price I paid for the last one, I got this one and another one, same price. So pretty good deal there, and I'm happy with that. So right now we're down to 488 degrees. Once we pass this bottom temperature, this out light will kick back on, therefore indicating that the band heater is heating up. So if you look at this paper here, and it's kind of hard to see, but you can see I've taken several notes. And what this is for instance, here I set the temperature for 348.5 degrees. It climbed as high as 450 something. And I've noticed that once you go into the PID and make some adjustments, and then you hit enter or set, it doesn't necessarily take those new adjustments the first time it heats up. So you'll have to let it cycle through a couple times. And that's what I monitored here. When I had it set for 348.5 degrees, the second time it heated up to 396.4. The third time it heated up to 396.7. So pretty consistent there, but still way higher than my set temperature. So I made some changes, and this time I changed the temperature, and I changed one of the other settings in the PID. But I changed the temperature to 419.4. It rebounded to 476.2, 465.7, 468, 467.5, and 471.8. So you can see it's still not consistently going to the same temperature every time, which is frustrating. But I guess at this point I need to treat, so I am going to go ahead and use it as it's working, or as it is working. And what I'm going to do, from what I gather, in Fahrenheit this should be set to 442 or 6 degrees, I believe. Celsius, it's I think 220. So once it gets to about where it is now, 432, you can see the heat light has kicked back off, but we're still climbing up here. So we'll see how high it gets. So once it gets to about 430 degrees, that's when I will turn it upside down, stick my cap on, and begin my treatment. Sure, it's going to get a lot hotter than it needs to, but at the same time, I don't think getting hotter than it needs to is going to keep the acid from turning to a vapor. I also noticed one of the other things I had to change. My copper tubing coming out the end here, it was another inch longer. And what was happening when I was experimenting out here, and I would take acid and put in one of my caps and put it on, it would fume or vapor just like it's supposed to, but at the tail end crystals would gather around this copper tubing, and I noticed the hole would get plugged. And when the hole gets plugged, it gets dangerous. This is why I suggest you get you a small wire or something and clean that out very frequently. What happens is when that gas or vapor turns back to a solid because it cooled, it'll plug this up. And if that gets plugged and you're doing a treatment and stick your cap on, I've heard stories of where it will blow the cap off. And that can be very dangerous because you don't want that on you, in your face, on your skin, anything like that. So make sure you keep this copper tubing cleaned out. And if you notice crystals building around the end of yours, maybe cut a little bit off and see what that does. Or maybe get some of this wrap and wrap around it. And I'm going to link some of this in different sizes down in the video description. So we're now at 449 and dropping. We did miss, I guess, how high it got, but couldn't have got too much higher than the 430, or it would still be way up there in the 400s. Another thing I did, you can see my mocaps there, and if you followed this series, you know that I used mocaps. I dremeled the inside out, and I stuck a 1/2 inch copper plug down inside of here. Well, yesterday I had to go get some more copper caps, and I noticed the 3/4 inch cap. Boy, that's a lot bigger. So I took this mocap, popped the copper cap out, the 1/2 inch one, and came back to my Dremel, made the hole bigger, pushed this down in, and I did have to cut some of the top off because it was too tall, but I definitely like having the bigger bowl to put the acid in versus this. So I will be updating all of them from this to this. But for now, they do work as they are. It's just a little cumbersome to dump your acid down in that little tiny hole versus having this bigger one. So you can see we've already kicked on. We're climbing again. We're at 468, 469. It's crazy. So I don't really understand how to regulate it to where it doesn't get as hot. I've tried nearly every setting in there, and after burning up my band heater, I'm kind of afraid to make too many adjustments. But if you have an Inkbird and you go by these instructions, I mean, just look at all these settings. There is a ton of them. Now, these ones were just given to me, and I just installed them. And these temperatures are set in Celsius, so you'll have to convert them over to Fahrenheit. They were given to me in a statement like they were a negative 100, negative 135, and negative 17. But that is not an option. Once you get down to 0 and try to go to negative numbers, it resets to 9999. So negative is not an option. So I am giving them a try, but just not with a negative factor. So if you have any insight or tips that you would like to throw out there on adjustments, tweaks, or different things of that sort, please leave them down in the video description. They could help me and many other people. So one thing I want to point out real quick is, just like using the wand, these treatments are 5 to 7 days apart, and there's at least 3 of them to do a good mite drop. So yes, it is a little bit time consuming as far as the 3 treatments, but at the same time with the ProVap, you're going to save a lot of time. So something to consider there. Another thing I want to mention is you want to do this treatment first thing in the morning or right before it starts to get dark. Some people even do it after dark and they use a red headlamp. The red headlamp doesn't aggravate the bees like a regular headlamp would. The reason you want to do it in these hours is because the majority of the bees, or all of the bees, are inside the hive. If you do it midday, you're only going to treat the bees that are within the hive. So a good reason to follow by these rules. Another thing I'd like to include is, if you're one of the people that made a homemade ProVap and you've mastered how to program this Inkbird PID, I would love for you to share some information. It would be enlightening not to only myself, but a lot of other people. There's a lot of people that's following the homemade ProVap video series that I've made in order to get theirs set up and working properly. So any insight that you could share would be greatly beneficial to a lot of people. So I hope you've enjoyed this week's video, and if so, go ahead and throw me a big thumbs up. That'll help boost it in the YouTube search ranks and make it easier for other beekeepers to find. If you haven't subscribed, please do so, and make sure you click on that little bell so you get notified when I release new videos. Thanks for watching, folks. JC's Bees.